Once upon a time, in a land filled with green hills and sparkling rivers, there lived a kind and lovely queen named Ilara. She had a heart full of sunshine and a smile that could make flowers bloom. The queen had a beautiful baby boy, a little prince with eyes as blue as the summer sky. They should have been the happiest family in the entire kingdom, living in a grand castle with music and laughter filling the halls every single day. But sadly, their lives were not filled with joy. A wicked king, whose heart was as cold and hard as stone, had locked them away. He was jealous of the queen's goodness and the people's love for her, so he put her and her baby in the tallest, loneliest tower in the castle. The tower was a sad and dreary place for a queen and her prince. There was only one small window, high up in the stone wall, with thick iron bars that blocked the view. From this window, Queen Ilara could only see a tiny patch of the sky. She would hold her baby close and point to the passing clouds, telling him stories of the wide, wonderful world outside. The room was cold and damp, with only a thin blanket to keep them warm. The wicked king sent them just enough food to survive, a small loaf of stale bread and a jug of water each day. It was hardly enough for one person, let alone a mother and her growing child. Every day was the same long, slow march of hours. The queen would sing lullabies to her baby, her voice soft and sweet, filling the empty room with a melody of hope. She would rock him gently in her arms, promising him that one day they would be free. She told him about the green meadows where they would run and play, and the warm sun that would kiss their faces. Even though her heart was heavy with sadness, she never let her baby see her tears. For him, she had to be strong. She had to believe that their story would not end in this cold grey tower. She held on to that tiny piece of hope with all her might. The wicked king sometimes came to the tower, not to show kindness, but to mock the queen. He would stand at the heavy oak door and boast about his power and his riches. He would tell her that everyone had forgotten her, that no one cared about the queen in the tower. "You will stay here forever," he would sneer, his voice like the scraping of rocks. "No one will ever rescue you." But Queen Ilara would simply hold her baby tighter and look at the king with quiet courage in her eyes. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her despair. Her love for her child was her shield, and it was stronger than any stone wall or iron bar. One evening, as the sun began to set, the tiny patch of sky visible from the window turned a brilliant shade of pink and gold. Queen Ilara was singing a soft lullaby to her baby, who was just about to fall asleep. Suddenly, a gentle light began to fill the room. It was not the light of the setting sun. This light was different. It shimmered and danced, sparkling like 1,000 tiny diamonds. It was warm and comforting, chasing away the cold shadows that always lingered in the corners of the tower room. The queen held her breath, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen anything so beautiful and magical. From the center of this shimmering light, a lovely figure appeared. She was a fairy, with wings like dragonfly wings, shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow. She had a kind face and a gentle smile that reached her sparkling eyes. "Do not be afraid, dear queen," the fairy said, her voice like the chiming of tiny silver bells. "I am the fairy of the Whispering Woods, and I have seen your sadness. I know of your goodness and your courage." The fairy floated closer, her light casting a warm golden glow on the queen and her sleeping baby. For the first time in a very long time, the queen did not feel so alone in her tall, lonely tower. The fairy explained that her magic was bound by certain rules. She could not simply break down the tower walls or spirit the queen away. The wicked king had used dark, powerful magic to create the prison, and only a special kind of magic could undo it. The magic of a pure and selfless heart is the strongest magic of all, the fairy explained softly. "I cannot free you myself, but I can offer you a glimmer of hope. I will watch over you. Your kindness will be your key." The fairy told the queen to never lose hope, no matter how difficult things became. She promised that goodness would always find a way to shine, even in the darkest of places. Before she vanished, the fairy touched the sleeping baby's forehead with her finger. A tiny golden star appeared for a moment and then faded away, leaving behind a feeling of warmth and peace. "He is a special child, and he will be safe," the fairy whispered. "Remember, Queen Alara, true strength is not in crowns or castles, but in kindness." And then, as quickly as she had appeared, the fairy and her beautiful light faded away, leaving the room quiet once more. But something had changed. The air was no longer heavy with despair. A tiny seed of hope had been planted in the Queen's heart, and she was determined to let it grow. The days that followed the fairy's visit were still hard. The wicked king continued to send only the smallest portions of food. The Queen grew thinner and paler, but she always made sure her baby had enough to eat. She would crumble her small piece of bread into a little bit of water to make a soft porridge for him, eating only what was left over. To pass the long hours and earn a little extra, the king made her work. Every morning, a guard would leave a large basket of tangled, rough wool at her door. The Queen had to spin this wool into fine, strong thread using a simple old spindle. It was difficult work, and her fingers were often sore and red. She would sit by the barred window for light, spinning and spinning for hours on end. While she worked, she would sing to her baby, who would coo and gurgle in his little makeshift cradle. One afternoon, as she was spinning, she noticed a tiny movement in a dusty corner of the room. It was a little mouse, no bigger than her thumb. It had soft grey fur and big dark eyes that seemed to watch her with great curiosity. The mouse was very thin, and it looked at the small crumbs of bread that had fallen from the Queen's meagre meal. It seemed just as hungry and lonely as she was. Most people would have shrieked or tried to shoo the mouse away, but Queen Alara's heart was filled with compassion for all living things. She looked at the tiny creature and saw not a pest, but a fellow prisoner of the tower. The mouse seemed frightened, but also very brave. It would dart out for a moment, its nose twitching, and then scamper back into the shadows. The Queen spoke to it in a soft, soothing voice. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Don't be afraid. We are all alone here, you and I and my little boy. Perhaps we can be friends." The mouse tilted its head, as if it understood every word she said. From that day on, the little mouse became the Queen's constant companion. It would come out of its hiding place whenever she was working, sitting quietly nearby and watching her spin the rough wool into thread. The Queen would talk to the mouse, telling it all her hopes and fears. She named him Squeaky. Having a friend, even a tiny mouse, made the long, lonely days a little more bearable. The mouse seemed to listen intently, its bright eyes never leaving her face. It was a small comfort, but in the dreary tower, even the smallest comfort felt like a great treasure. The Queen felt a bond with this little creature who shared her prison. One day the guard brought an even smaller piece of bread than usual. It was barely enough for her baby, let alone for herself. The Queen's stomach ached with hunger as she prepared the soft meal for her son. After he had eaten and drifted off to sleep, she was left with only a tiny, dry crust for herself. She was about to eat it when she saw her little friend, Squeaky, peeking out from his corner. He looked so small and frail, and his little nose twitched as he smelled the bread. The Queen looked at the crust in her hand, and then at the tiny, hungry mouse. She remembered the fairy's words about kindness being the key. Her own hunger was very great, but the sight of the little mouse was too much for her kind heart to bear. She broke the already tiny crust in half and held out a piece to the mouse. "Here, little friend," she said softly, "you are hungry too. We must share what we have." Squeaky hesitated for a moment, then scurried forward and gently took the crumb from her fingers. He ate it quickly, and then looked up at her with his bright, intelligent eyes. It was a small act of kindness, a selfless choice made by a queen who had almost nothing to give. She had chosen to share her last bite of food with a friend. As soon as the mouse finished the crumb, something magical happened. The simple wooden spindle that the Queen used for her work began to glow with a soft golden light. The Queen watched in amazement as the spindle started to spin all by itself. It moved faster than her own hands ever could, pulling the rough wool from the basket and turning it into the most beautiful, shimmering golden thread she had ever seen. The thread piled up on the floor, glowing softly in the dim light of the tower. It was a magical gift, a reward for her selfless act of kindness toward the little mouse. The queen was overjoyed. The magical spindle worked all through the night, spinning the entire basket of wool into a pile of precious golden thread. The next morning, when the guard came to collect her work, his eyes grew wide with astonishment. He had never seen such fine and beautiful thread. He took it to the wicked king, who, despite his cruelty, was also very greedy. The king was so impressed with the exquisite thread that he ordered the guard to bring the queen a better meal. That day she received a whole loaf of fresh bread, a piece of cheese, and a red apple. She and her baby ate well, and she made sure to share her feast with her dear friend, Squeaky the Mouse. The magical spindle continued its work every night, turning rough wool into piles of beautiful golden thread. The greedy king was so pleased with this treasure that he kept sending better food and warmer blankets to the tower. The queen and her baby were no longer cold or hungry. But Queen Elara knew that food and blankets were not the same as freedom. Her little prince was growing bigger every day. He was starting to crawl, and the small tower room was not a place for a child to grow up. She longed for him to feel the soft grass beneath his feet and the warm sun on his face. She had to find a way to get him out of the tower. She shared her worries with her little friend Squeaky. As she spoke, the mouse seemed to listen with unusual intelligence. That night, after the spindle had finished its work, Squeaky did something extraordinary. He scurried over to the pile of golden thread and began to nudge it with his nose, pushing it toward the queen. Then he ran to the barred window and back again. The queen watched him, puzzled at first, but then she began to understand. The thread was strong and long. Perhaps it could be used as a rope to lower something from the high window. It was a daring and hopeful idea. The next day, the queen spoke to the old woman who brought her the wool and took away the thread. The old woman had a kind face and always looked at the queen with sad, sympathetic eyes. The queen whispered her desperate plan. "If I can make a basket," she said, "and tie it to a long rope of this golden thread, could you wait below the tower at midnight? Could you take my son to a safe place?" The old woman's eyes filled with tears. She had served the royal family for years and loved the kind queen. She knew the terrible risk, but she nodded bravely. "For you, my queen," she whispered, "I will be there." And so the plan was set. The queen worked tirelessly, using strips from her own worn dress and the sturdiest threads from the wool to weave a small, strong basket. It had to be big enough for her baby, but small enough to fit through the narrow bars of the window. She spent the next few days weaving the basket and braiding the shimmering golden thread into a long, powerful rope. Every night Squeaky would watch her, his little eyes shining with what looked like encouragement. The hope of her baby's freedom gave the queen a strength she never knew she had. The night of the escape was drawing near. The night of the escape finally arrived. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, making the world outside dark and silent. The queen held her sleeping baby, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the small basket and the long golden rope, and then at the high barred window. Everything was ready. She wrapped her son in the warmest blanket and gently placed him inside the basket. He was so perfect, so innocent. She kissed his forehead and whispered a prayer that he would be safe. She knew the old woman would be waiting below, ready to spirit him away to a hidden cottage in the woods. Just as she was about to tie the golden rope to the basket, a terrible thing happened. A large grey owl swooped down and landed on the windowsill. In its sharp talons it held a terrified, squeaking Squeaky. The owl had caught her little friend. It looked at the queen with its big, hungry eyes, as if it was about to fly away with its prize. The queen's heart froze. She could not let the owl take her friend, the little mouse who had brought magic and companionship into her dreary life. But what could she do? The owl was a fierce predator. The queen was faced with an impossible choice. In her hand, she held the key to her son's freedom, the basket and the rope. If she acted quickly, she could lower him to safety before the guard made his rounds. But if she did that, she would be abandoning her friend. The owl would surely eat poor Squeaky. She looked at her sleeping baby, and then at the struggling mouse. Her heart was torn in two. How could she choose between her child and the friend who had shown her such loyalty? It was the most difficult moment of her life. Her son's future was in one hand, and her friend's life was in the other. Remembering the fairy's words, that kindness and a selfless heart held the strongest magic, the queen made her decision. She could not let her friend perish. She put the basket down gently and grabbed the only thing she had to offer, the piece of cheese that had come with her dinner. "Here!" she cried out to the owl, her voice trembling. "Take this instead, please! Let my friend go!" She threw the cheese toward the window. The owl, surprised, dropped the mouse to snatch the bigger prize and flew off into the night. Squeaky was safe, but the noise had attracted the attention of the guard. Heavy footsteps were now pounding up the tower stairs. The chance to save her baby was lost. The heavy oak door to the tower room burst open. The queen braced herself for the wicked king's anger. Holding her baby's basket close to her heart, she had failed. But it was not a guard who stood in the doorway. Instead, the room was once again filled with a brilliant, shimmering light, even brighter and more wonderful than before. The light was so warm and powerful that it seemed to push all the fear and shadows out of the tower. The queen shielded her eyes, and when she looked again, she saw the kind fairy of the whispering woods standing before her. But the fairy was not alone. The little mouse, Squeaky, scurried from the corner where he had fallen. As he ran into the center of the magical light, he began to change. His tiny form grew and shimmered, transforming right before the queen's eyes. The soft grey fur became a beautiful gown of sparkling silver, and the bright mouse eyes became the wise and gentle eyes of the fairy herself. The mouse had been the fairy all along, in disguise. Queen Elara stared in utter astonishment. Her little friend, the companion she had shared her last crust with, was this powerful magical being. The fairy smiled, her voice full of warmth and admiration. "Dearest Queen Elara," she said, her voice chiming like bells, "I had to be sure. I had to know if your kindness was true, even when faced with the hardest choice of all. You were willing to sacrifice your own child's escape to save the life of a tiny mouse." The fairy explained that this was the ultimate test. A heart that could show such selfless love for the smallest of creatures was truly pure. The queen had proven that her goodness was not just for show, it was a deep and real part of who she was. "You have passed the test," the fairy declared, her voice ringing with power. "Your selfless heart has unlocked the most powerful magic in the land. The dark enchantments of the wicked king are no match for the magic of true kindness and friendship." The fairy raised her hand, and the golden thread that the queen had braided into a rope began to glow with an intense light. The iron bars on the window melted away like wax, and the heavy locked door swung open freely. The prison that had held the queen for so long was a prison no more. Her act of love had finally set her free. With a wave of the fairy's hand, the cold stone tower began to transform. The damp walls were suddenly covered in beautiful tapestries, and the hard floor was softened with warm, colorful rugs. A gentle, warm breeze floated through the now open window, carrying the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. The fairy's magic was not just breaking the prison, it was erasing all memory of the sadness that had lived there. The wicked king, his power broken by the fairy's stronger magic, was banished from the kingdom forever, sent to a faraway land where his cold heart could harm no one else. The fairy gently took the queen's hand. "Your courage and your kindness have saved you and your son," she said. "You have shown that love is a light that can never be extinguished." The fairy led the queen and her baby out of the tower and down the winding stairs. As they walked, the castle itself seemed to wake up from a long, dark sleep. Torches lit up along the corridors, and the sound of joyful music could be heard in the distance. The people of the kingdom, learning of their beloved queen's return, were already celebrating. They had never forgotten her, just as she had always hoped. When they reached the grand throne room, the queen's loyal subjects were there to greet her with cheers and happy tears. They welcomed back their rightful ruler, the queen with a heart of gold. Queen Elara, with her beautiful baby boy in her arms, took her place on the throne, not as a ruler of power, but as a ruler of kindness and compassion. She knew that her greatest strength was not her crown, but the love she had in her heart. She ruled for many, many years, and her kingdom became known as the happiest and kindest in all the world. The queen and the fairy remained friends for the rest of their days. The fairy would often visit the castle, not as a powerful magical being, but as a dear friend, to share stories and laughter with the queen and the young prince. And the queen never forgot the lesson she learned in that lonely tower. She taught her son, and all the people of her kingdom, that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. She proved that true friendship and a selfless heart hold a magic more powerful than any dark spell, bringing hope and happiness that can last a lifetime.